Elon Musk, the man who launches rockets into space, just tried to launch something else, an insult aimed straight at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. But here's the part no one saw coming. Crockett didn't roll her eyes. She didn't clap back with a soundbite. She reached for a pen, and what she wrote would leave Musk, and millions of Americans watching, completely stunned. It started, as these things so often do, with arrogance disguised as cleverness. Musk, from behind the glow of his phone screen, challenged a sitting member of Congress to an IQ test, as if human worth could be measured by a number, as if public service could be reduced to trivia. For him, it was theater. For her, it was an attack not just on her, but on every voice like hers that dared to step into the halls of power. And in that moment, the stage was set. Musk, the billionaire tech mogul, accustomed to admiration, armed with wealth and status. On the other side, Jasmine Crockett, a woman forged in the fire of struggle, carrying the weight of communities often dismissed and underestimated. It was more than a petty feud. It was a collision of worlds: privilege versus persistence, arrogance versus dignity. The internet roared instantly. Musk supporters laughed and mocked, circling around his challenge like vultures expecting a kill. Commentators speculated whether Crockett would even dare to respond. But while the noise grew louder, she remained silent, until the day she chose to put her response on paper. And that silence, that calm, was its own power. Because when Crockett finally unveiled her letter, it didn't read like a rebuttal. It didn't stoop to his level. It soared above it. Each word was chosen like a blade, each sentence heavy with the authority of lived experience. For Musk, it was supposed to be a game. For Crockett, it became an opportunity. A chance to remind the world what intelligence truly looks like when stripped of ego and measured in courage, service, and truth. But what Crockett wrote inside that letter wasn't just personal, it shook Musk's entire persona. Why would a man who builds rockets, runs billion-dollar companies, and styles himself as the world's great innovator, stoop to something as childish as challenging a congresswoman to an IQ test? That question is at the heart of this bizarre standoff, because this isn't really about intelligence, it's about power. It's about who gets to define worth in America. Elon Musk has built his empire on the idea that genius excuses arrogance. He flaunts his cleverness, his wealth, his ability to bend governments and markets. To him, intellect isn't a tool, it's a throne. And from that throne, he can look down on anyone, even elected officials, with a smirk that says, "Prove you belong in my world." When Musk tossed out that IQ challenge, it wasn't meant as a fair contest. It was a reminder of his privilege, a way to reduce a black congresswoman, a woman from Texas who had fought her way through law school and the courtroom, into a punchline. But Jasmine Crockett's story is the mirror opposite of Musk's. She didn't inherit billions or buy platforms where she could amplify her own voice at will. She earned her credibility in the trenches. Fighting for justice, defending communities that rarely make headlines, standing up in hearings where her presence alone defied expectations. For Crockett, intelligence isn't a trophy. It's the survival skill that keeps her constituents heard in a system designed to silence them. That's why this moment matters. It isn't just about two public figures trading blows online. It's about what, and who, America chooses to value. Is it the loudest voice with the deepest pockets, or the steady voice that speaks for those who cannot afford a microphone? And let's be clear, this wasn't Musk's first attempt at provocation. From mocking pronouns on Twitter to using his platform to belittle critics, he has turned trolling into a sport. His fans cheer it on, seeing him as untouchable, too rich and too powerful to face consequences. To them, Crockett was just the latest target, a chance to watch another opponent crumble under his digital weight. But that assumption was his mistake. Crockett wasn't looking to win likes or retweets. She wasn't playing his game at all. Instead, she took his insult and transformed it into something larger, a challenge to the very notion that intelligence belongs only to the privileged. And just when people thought this was another meaningless Twitter spat, another distraction destined to fade in the cycle of online outrage, Crockett changed the game. To understand why Elon Musk's challenge landed with such venom, you have to step back and look at the man himself. Because Elon Musk is not just a CEO. He's a spectacle, a paradox, a figure who embodies both breathtaking brilliance and suffocating arrogance. On one hand, his resume reads like the blueprint for a modern myth. The South African-born entrepreneur built PayPal, electrified the car industry with Tesla, and turned the dream of space travel into a for-profit reality through SpaceX. He sells himself as a visionary, a man carrying humanity's survival on his back as he promises colonies on Mars and tunnels under our cities. For millions, he is a kind of prophet of progress, an immigrant who became the richest man alive, the daring mind who proves that ambition can rewrite the rules of what's possible. But there's another side, the shadow that follows the light. For all his genius, Musk thrives on trolling, on belittling, on wielding his wealth like a weapon. He uses Twitter not as a tool of innovation, but as an arena for mockery, treating the world like an audience for his taunts. One day, he's boasting about AI breakthroughs, the next he's ridiculing politicians, journalists, even ordinary people, with the cruelty of a schoolyard bully who knows he can't be touched. This contradiction is what makes Musk such a polarizing figure. To some, he's the savior of humanity. To others, he's the embodiment of unchecked ego, a man who confuses arrogance with authenticity. And the truth is, both portraits are real. He is brilliant, yes, but he is also reckless, prone to stunts that burn those who dare to question him. Think about it, this is the man who once mocked a British cave rescuer during the Thai soccer team crisis, casually calling him pedo guy when his authority was challenged. This is the man who dismissed entire communities by mocking gender pronouns for laughs, who laid off workers with a tweet, who uses his platform as if empathy were a liability. Musk's power has always rested on the idea that his wealth and vision make him untouchable. And so, when confronted with a congresswoman like Jasmine Crockett, sharp, composed, unwilling to play his game, his instinct was not to debate policy, not to meet her arguments with facts, but to belittle her intelligence itself. That IQ test challenge was no accident. It was a signature Musk move, reduce a complex human being to a number, a joke, a footnote in his theater of self-importance. He wasn't measuring intelligence, he was flexing power. He wanted to remind Crockett, and by extension anyone who looked like her or came from where she came from, that no matter how hard they fought, they could never climb high enough to look him in the eye. And yet, in framing himself as the arbiter of intellect, Musk exposed his own insecurity. Because if your genius speaks for itself, why must you keep insisting upon it? Why must you constantly prove it, test it, parade it like a badge? True brilliance doesn't need to punch down. Only arrogance does. That is the heart of Musk's character in this story, a man whose innovations should have made him admired, but whose ego demands submission instead. A man who, for all his rockets and satellites, cannot resist the urge to play the role of a bully. But arrogance, history shows, always meets its match, and Musk was about to meet his. Before her name trended on Twitter, before she sparred with billionaires and stood in the spotlight of Congress, Jasmine Crockett was a daughter of Texas. She didn't grow up surrounded by privilege or insulated by wealth. She grew up watching, learning and fighting in communities that knew what it meant to be overlooked. For her, survival wasn't guaranteed. It was earned every single day. From an early age, Crockett was taught that education wasn't just about grades. It was about doors. Doors that would stay locked unless she found the courage to push them open. While others leaned on generational wealth or networks of influence, Crockett relied on persistence, resilience, and a hunger to prove that brilliance comes in many forms, often from places where the world forgets to look. Law school was no easy path. It demanded long nights, sacrifices, and an iron will. But Crockett endured because she understood what the degree meant. It wasn't just her future. It was the future of people she had grown up with, people who couldn't afford the lawyers who smoothed paths for the privileged. She chose law because she believed justice was not supposed to be a luxury. And so, with every textbook she studied and every exam she passed, she carried with her the weight of voices waiting to be heard. When Crockett began practicing law, she didn't chase the high-profile cases that padded some A's. She took the clients others ignored. She fought for those who had no one else to fight for them. Her courtroom became an arena where she could stand between ordinary people and systems designed to crush them. Every victory mattered, not because it brought prestige, but because it carved out dignity for someone told they didn't deserve it. Her journey into public service grew out of that same conviction. Politics, for Crockett, wasn't about climbing a ladder or earning applause. It was about bringing those unheard stories into the halls of power, about forcing the country to reckon with the intelligence, strength, and determination of communities it so often underestimated. When she raised her hand to take the oath of office, it wasn't a ceremonial gesture. It was a declaration she belonged here, and so did the people she represented. That's what makes her clash with Elon Musk so powerful. Because for Crockett, this wasn't just about her. She carried with her the weight of generations of women and men told they weren't smart enough, weren't polished enough, weren't rich enough to matter. Musk's challenge wasn't aimed only at her. It echoed every dismissal, every slight, every insult that had ever been hurled at those who dared to step outside the boxes society built for them. And yet, through it all, Crockett never needed to shout about her intelligence. Her record spoke for itself. Her victories in court, her speeches in Congress, her very presence in those spaces were proof of her capacity, her clarity, her brilliance. She didn't have to boast about IQ because her life was the evidence. And that contrast, between a billionaire measuring intelligence in numbers and a congresswoman proving it through service, set the stage for something much larger than a feud. Admiration for Crockett doesn't come from theatrics. It comes from her persistence, her calm under pressure, her refusal to bow to arrogance. She is the embodiment of a truth that resonates far beyond politics. That dignity itself is intelligence, that courage itself is brilliance. In her, millions saw themselves, their own struggles, their own triumphs, their own worth reflected back in her resilience. This wasn't just about Musk versus Crockett. It was about every person who's ever been told they weren't smart enough, every immigrant whose accent was mocked, every woman who was doubted, every working-class child who was told to stay in their lane. Crockett was more than a congresswoman in this moment. She was a vessel for a collective defiance, a reminder that brilliance often hides in plain sight, waiting for the chance to be recognized. So when Musk issued his IQ challenge, Crockett didn't shout back. She picked up her pen. The challenge should have been laughable. An IQ test, thrown out like a dare on the schoolyard. Yet coming from Elon Musk, it carried the weight of his billion-dollar empire, his army of online followers, and his reputation for humiliating those who dared to push back. For him it was a game of superiority. He wasn't interested in dialogue, in policy, in debate. He was staging a spectacle. And in those first hours, it looked like the spectacle was working. Twitter lit up in a frenzy. Musk's supporters flooded timelines with jokes and memes. They mocked Jasmine Crockett as if she were already defeated, painting her as an amateur stepping into the arena of a self-declared genius. Hashtags trended late, night commentators cracked jokes, and the digital mob circled, waiting for her to stumble. To them, this was entertainment. A billionaire flexing his power over a congresswoman. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't scramble to fire off tweets or launch into a media counterattack. She stayed quiet, watching as the noise grew louder, signaling that she had no intention of playing Musk's game. And that silence unsettled people. Because silence, in the middle of a storm, is not weakness, it's a signal. It's the calm before something bigger, something deliberate. Still, the pressure mounted. Commentators speculated, would she accept? Would she dodge? Would she try to ignore him and risk looking weak? Musk's fans taunted her relentlessly, interpreting her composure as proof of defeat. To them, the absence of a quick response was validation that their hero had already won. But Crockett was never one to perform for the crowd. She understood that real power doesn't come from rushing into the noise. It comes from controlling the moment when the world is finally forced to listen. And so she waited, letting the arrogance of the challenge echo in the void, letting Musk's bravado inflate until it was impossible to miss. Behind the scenes, though something was stirring, Crockett wasn't dodging. She was preparing. While Musk relied on spectacle, she was crafting substance. Where he depended on taunts, she was assembling truth. And when she was ready, she would deliver not a tweet, not a soundbite, but a letter. Something permanent, deliberate, and impossible to reduce to a punchline. The anticipation built like pressure in a sealed chamber. Each day of silence became part of the drama. Each mocking tweet only sharpened the edge of what was coming. And though no one outside her circle knew it yet, Crockett was turning Musk's insult into an opportunity. An opportunity to define intelligence on her terms, not his. And then, the silence broke. Her letter was released. Not on a whim, not as a reaction, but as a declaration. It spread across screens, across news feeds, across conversations. And in an instant, the storm of laughter and mockery fell quiet. Because this wasn't a tweet. This wasn't a soundbite. This was Jasmine Crockett in her own words commanding the stage. But then Crockett's letter was released, and silence fell across the noise. When Jasmine Crockett's letter finally landed, it didn't just enter the conversation, it seized it. It read less like a rebuttal and more like a closing argument in a courtroom where the jury was the American public, and the defendant was arrogance itself. Every sentence felt deliberate, like she had sharpened it on the grindstone of her experience. She began not with anger but with clarity. Mr. Musk. She wrote, "You may believe intelligence is a test to be passed, but I believe it is a life to be lived." That opening line alone reframed the entire challenge. Musk had reduced brilliance to a number, to a contest. Crockett expanded it into something bigger, something untouchable. Intelligence, she argued, wasn't about what you could memorize. It was about what you endured, what you built, what you gave back. She walked readers through her own path, not boasting, but illuminating. She spoke of growing up in a Texas community where opportunity was not a birthright but a battle. She spoke of pushing through law school with grit rather than wealth, of defending clients who couldn't afford champions, of choosing service over fortune. If you want to measure intelligence, she wrote, measure the strength it takes to lift others up when the system is built to keep them down. Gasps rippled across living rooms, across Twitter feeds, across the airwaves of late-night radio. Commentators replayed those words again and again. Here was a congresswoman flipping the insult into inspiration, turning what was meant to be a humiliation into a declaration of dignity. And she didn't stop there. She addressed Musk directly, calling out the hollowness of his taunt. You speak of IQ as though it were currency. But money cannot buy compassion, nor can privilege manufacture wisdom. These things must be earned. That line struck like a hammer. It wasn't just about Musk. It was about every boardroom, every ivory tower, every space where power tries to masquerade as intellect. The letter then turned, almost like a lawyer dismantling a witness on the stand. She listed her legislative achievements, bills introduced, committees served, hearings where her voice carried the weight of her district. She reminded him that she wasn't just a name on a Twitter feed. She was a representative chosen by thousands, entrusted with their hopes and their struggles. My test is renewed every 2 years by the people who send me to Congress, she wrote. And they do not grade me on riddles or puzzles. They grade me on whether I fight for them. Crowd reactions were instant and visceral. On social media, people quoted her words with fire emojis, hashtags, and captions like, "Chi-ice is what intelligence looks like." Memes popped up of Musk staring at a blank test paper, while Crockett's words towered over him like a headline. Even some of Musk's admirers hesitated, their laughter cut short by the undeniable weight of her response. But Crockett wasn't simply scoring points. She was building a narrative bigger than herself. In one of the most quoted passages, she wrote, "You see intelligence in algorithms and equations. I see it in single mothers working 2 jobs and still raising scholars. I see it in immigrants who cross oceans with nothing but hope and turn it into legacies. I see it in every young black girl told she's too loud, too bold, too ambitious, and who goes on to change the world anyway." It was the kind of rhetoric that lifted her letter out of the personal and into the universal. She wasn't just answering Musk. She was answering every sneer, every doubt, every dismissal that had ever been thrown at those who didn't fit society's narrow definition of genius. And perhaps the sharpest cut of all came near the close, when Crockett wrote, "You may launch rockets, but I launch legislation. You may chase Mars, but I fight for Earth." And when history writes the story of intelligence, it will not be about who passed a test. It will be about who lifted humanity higher. That was the mic drop moment. Commentators described it as the line that turned the feud into a lesson. Newspapers quoted it in bold headlines. It was replayed in YouTube reaction videos, in podcasts, in TikToks where young people read it aloud with pride. And through it all, Musk himself fell quiet. The man who had turned trolling into a pastime, who never missed a chance to get the last word, had no retort. His silence spoke volumes. Because how do you answer a letter that doesn't just defend dignity? It redefines it. For Crockett's supporters, for marginalized communities, for anyone who'd ever been told they didn't measure up, the letter was vindication. It was proof that arrogance could be dismantled not with louder insults, but with deeper truth. It was the kind of response that felt historic, not just viral. But if Crockett's words were powerful, the ripple effect was even more explosive. The moment Crockett's letter went public, it was as if the internet collectively leaned forward, screens lighting up like a stage. Within minutes, hashtags began to climb Crockett vs Musk, for real for pen mightier. What started as a single spark turned into a digital wildfire. Twitter threads dissected every line of her letter, Instagram reels dramatized her words with swelling music, TikTok creators filmed themselves reading the sharpest passages like spoken word poetry. The memes hit almost instantly. One viral post showed Musk holding a giant pencil twice his size, staring blankly at an exam sheet labeled, "Compassion." Another split screened his rocket launches with Crockett's quote, "You may launch rockets, but I launch legislation." It wasn't just humor, it was vindication, laughter weaponized against arrogance. Commentators flooded the airwaves. Cable panels debated whether this was the end of Musk's untouchable aura. Progressive pundits cheered it as a watershed moment. Even some conservative commentators admitted, grudgingly, that Crockett had landed a clean blow, and late-night hosts couldn't resist. The jokes practically wrote themselves. One quipped Elon wanted a test of IQ. Turns out, Crockett just tested his ego, and he failed. But what mattered most wasn't the pundits or the memes. It was the voices of everyday people, suddenly lit up with recognition. Teachers tweeted that they planned to read Crockett's letter aloud in class as an example of courage. Nurses posted selfies with the quote about intelligence in those who lift others up. A grocery worker's viral TikTok said it plainly, "For once, someone in power didn't talk over us, they talked for us." Celebrities joined in, amplifying the message. A-list actors retweeted her lines with fist emojis. Musicians sampled her words into short beats that looped endlessly on social media. Even athletes wore t-shirts printed with "Fight for Earth." During warm-ups, a nod to Crockett's Mars vs. Earth line that had already entered pop culture. And then came the shock of unexpected allies. Some Silicon Valley insiders, people who had long admired Musk, broke ranks. One tech journalist admitted, "I've defended Elon for years, but Crockett exposed the side of him I can't unsee." Even a few Tesla investors cautiously tweeted their respect for Crockett, hinting that perhaps Musk's antics were beginning to outweigh his genius. The hero versus villain framing grew sharper with each passing hour. Musk, once the maverick genius, now looks small, mocked, cornered, diminished by his own hubris. Crockett, meanwhile, stood taller than ever, not just a congresswoman, but a symbol of dignity striking back at condescension. And it wasn't just about her. The ripple touched communities who had long felt erased by elite dismissals. Immigrants, women of color, working-class families, all saw themselves in her words. One viral thread put it simply: Crockett didn't just clap back at Elon. She clapped back at every boss, every teacher, every politician who ever told us we weren't smart enough. That thread racked up millions of likes, proof that the resonance was deeper than the spectacle. Musk tried briefly to regain ground. A few cryptic tweets appeared, sarcastic emojis, half-hearted jabs about woke IQ tests, but each attempt fell flat, drowned out by a chorus of responses quoting Crockett's letter back at him. For once, his trolling seemed tired, his magic gone. Silence eventually replaced his banter, and in that silence, the verdict was clear. Meanwhile, Crockett's following exploded. Her social media accounts gained hundreds of thousands of new followers in days. Interviews poured in from cable networks to grassroots podcasts. But through it all, she didn't gloat. Her tone remained measured, calm, reminding everyone that the letter wasn't about winning a fight. It was about reframing what intelligence truly meant. The internet had crowned its victor, but something larger was happening beneath the surface. Beyond the laughter, the memes, the hashtags, a deeper current stirred. People weren't just celebrating Crockett, they were rethinking the values they'd long been told to admire. And in the middle of all the noise, a larger lesson began to emerge. In the days after the firestorm, something remarkable became clear. What had begun as a petty insult from one of the wealthiest men alive had transformed into a mirror reflecting America's deepest values. Crockett's letter, once dismissed by some as just another exchange in the endless churn of social media, revealed itself as something more: a manifesto of dignity. She had taken Musk's narrow challenge, the cold measurement of IQ, a number often wielded like a weapon, and flipped it inside out. Intelligence, she argued, wasn't about who could solve equations faster or who commanded the biggest bank account. It was about the choices one made when power was in their hands. Did you use it to belittle? Or to build? Did you chase Mars while ignoring Earth? Or did you fight for the people still struggling on it? In that reframing, Crockett did more than win an argument. She gave voice to a truth millions had always felt but rarely heard spoken aloud. True intelligence, she showed, was integrity. It was empathy. It was courage. It was the kind of quiet brilliance that doesn't trend on stock tickers, but changes lives in courtrooms, classrooms, and communities. The emotional weight of her words lingered long after the memes faded. Teachers held discussions about what intelligence really means, asking students to name acts of kindness they'd witnessed. Parents told their children Crockett's story as a reminder that dignity beats arrogance, no matter the odds. And everyday people, immigrants, workers, dreamers, shared the letter as proof that they weren't less than, no matter what the powerful implied. Even Musk's silence became part of the lesson. For years, he had thrived on being the loudest voice in the room, using his platform like a megaphone that drowned out criticism. But this time, the platform couldn't save him. Crockett's pen had carved through the noise, reminding the world that words grounded in truth don't just compete with wealth and influence, they surpass them. It was a rare inversion of power. The billionaire, accustomed to commanding headlines, was overshadowed by a congresswoman writing not for fame but for principle. And in that contrast, people found hope. The spectacle wasn't just entertaining, it was empowering. Crockett's victory wasn't measured in likes, retweets, or even media cycles. It was measured in hearts lifted, in communities reminded of their worth, in young people who saw themselves reflected in her defiance. She had turned a stunt into a statement, a taunt into testimony. And so, the moral crystallized intelligence divorced from empathy is hollow. Brilliance without humility collapses under its own weight. But integrity, the kind Crockett displayed, endures. It builds. It inspires. It leaves behind not just applause, but a path for others to follow. This wasn't just about Elon Musk versus Jasmine Crockett anymore. It was about the timeless clash between arrogance and dignity, between the noise of privilege and the steady power of principle. And in that clash, dignity had triumphed. But if this story taught us one thing, it's that the pen still beats the platform. Elon Musk thought he could frame the moment. He believed a challenge of IQ, a cold number, a sterile test, would be enough to reduce Jasmine Crockett to a punchline. But instead, his gambit backfired. The man who built rockets, the man who commands billions, was left silent by a single letter. Not a clapback, not a rant, but a crafted reminder that intelligence is more than privilege, more than wealth, more than ego. The title told you the story. Musk issued the challenge. Crockett answered with dignity. And in the end, Her words didn't just meet his arrogance, they dismantled it piece by piece, until all that remained was the truth. That is the lesson worth carrying. Because this was never just about a billionaire and a congresswoman. This was about all of us. About every person who has ever been told they weren't smart enough, strong enough, or worthy enough to stand in the room. Crockett's letter was proof that you don't need the biggest platform to make the loudest impact. You need conviction, courage, and the willingness to write your own truth. So here's your call to action: subscribe if you believe dignity will always outshine arrogance. Share this with someone who's been underestimated, remind them they already hold the pen, and comment below which part of Crockett's letter struck you most. Because this story doesn't end here. The letter may have silenced Musk, but its echo is still ringing. And every time we choose truth over arrogance, empathy over ego, dignity over derision, that echo grows louder. The mic may have dropped, but the message lives on, and it's waiting for you to carry it forward.